Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful Sunday, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. Also welcoming in our audience from Substack as well. My friends, thank you all for tuning in, for subscribing, for sharing your emails, your notes, your texts, your tweets. I love all of them. I'm grateful you're listening to the show, and I'm grateful that you're finding value in this and sharing it with your family and friends. So let's keep the conversation going. We've got a really good show lined up today. Corryn G. Freeman is here. She's a Florida-based social activist and a political operative. Really, when talk about change agent, she exemplifies that. She's the executive director of Future Coalition. This is an organization whose mission is to provide young change makers with the resources they need to bring about this transformational change that we definitely need in this country. And speaking of young people and transformational change, we also need to make a major change to our marriage laws because, believe it or not, child marriage is still legal in the United States. In fact, only 11 states have banned it, and that's only recently in the last 5 or 6 years. I'm going to come back to you with a number, but think about how many child marriages, documented child marriages, there have been since the year 2000 in the United States. Just think of a number, right? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? Is it 10,000? Think of a number, and I'm going to come back in a second, and I promise for most of you, it's going to blow your mind. We also are going to talk about, so we're going to talk about child marriage. We're also going to talk about this really significant resignation by a U.S. Army major, a guy named Harrison Mann. And I'm going to go through his resignation letter, and he's resigning due to what he calls the nearly unquestioned support of Israel in the siege on Gaza, leading to the starvation and deaths of tens of thousands of Palestinians. A really, really powerful letter, one that he's Jewish, one that where he cites his ancestry is Jewish and how his grandfather wouldn't even buy German goods because of the Holocaust. Of course, after the Holocaust, he never forgave Germany for the atrocities that they committed against the Jewish people. So we'll dive into that. But before we bring on Corryn Freeman, I want to talk about child marriage in America because this is epidemic. It's critical that we address it because a lot of folks, I'm realizing, don't have any idea of just how bad. They have no idea how bad the situation actually is. I mean, children have it tough today, right? Between grades and drugs and alcohol and pornography. But apparently the threat of child marriage is a serious threat for children. This is not hyperbole. In 2024, to this year, thousands of children annually are forced into child marriages right here in the United States. And Republicans seem to want to keep it that way with several thousand documented child marriages every year, some involving children as young as 10 years old. It's clear we need legislative solutions and penalties for those who exploit children. So where do we begin? Well, let's address this. Because first, we need to truly understand just how bad this epidemic is in America right now. Despite widespread condemnation, despite international treaties, child marriages continue in the United States. And I'm going to quote from The Independent. They're reporting by a group called Unchained at Last. Remember, I asked you earlier to think about a number. Well, I'm going to give you two numbers. Here's the first number. They document that between 2000 and 2015, there were at least 207,468 minor children married in the United States. Okay? The youngest wedded were 3 10-year-old girls in Tennessee who were married to men aged 24, 25, and 31, respectively. The youngest groom was an 11-year-old boy married to a 27-year-old woman, also in Tennessee. I don't know what the hell they got going on in Tennessee, but holy crap. Children as young as 12 were also granted marriage licenses in Alaska, Louisiana, South Carolina, while 11 other states allowed 13-year-olds to wed instead. More than 1,000 children under age 14 were granted marriage licenses. And this problem persists. Here's the second number I'm going to give you. Because another study conducted by Unchained at Last in 2021 found more than 300,000 documented cases of child marriage, and this is just until 2018. So it's far more than that. And by the way, this is incomplete data because 10 states don't even report this data at all. So out of 40 states, you have more than 300,000 documented child marriages. 60,000 of those marriages, by the way, involved an age difference that would have otherwise been considered a sex crime. So literally a sex crime occurred, but because of a forced marriage, suddenly it's magically off the books. And to make it even worse, in many states, children who are married cannot divorce, making child marriage a one-way ticket. As divorce lawyer Nancy Zalewski-Berg explains, a minor cannot file for a divorce because they're not considered old enough to do it yet. That's because marriage is considered a contract, and most laws stipulate that only adults can enter into contracts. So if a minor wants to change their marriage contract, they need an adult to help them do it. Insane. And as you might guess, none of the top 10 states that are leading in child marriage are Republican-led states. They are as follows: Nevada, Idaho, Arkansas, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Wyoming, Utah, Alabama, West Virginia, and Mississippi, the usual suspects. And it's Republicans who are unfortunately leading the charge. The latest argument is that, well, it's tradition, it's religion, it's maturity. Nonsense. The latest argument says that child marriage is better than abortion, as insane as that sounds. Notwithstanding that states that ban abortion also suffer at least a 24% increase in maternal mortality and have the highest rate of infant mortality as well. Facts just aren't Republican things, apparently. West Virginia and Wyoming, Republicans have launched formal efforts to protect child marriage, not to protect children, but to protect child marriage. In New Hampshire, as recently as 2018, child marriage was legal for girls as young as 13 and boys as young as 14. And the reason why the girl-boy disparity is significant is because 86% of child marriages are of young girls to male adults. 86%. Efforts to ban child marriage in New Hampshire faced opposition recently when 174 Republicans voted against a bill to ban child marriage. One Republican lawmaker, State Representative Jess Edwards, went on the House floor to describe teen girls as, quote, ripe and fertile. Horrifying remarks, just absolutely disgusting remarks. In Missouri, we see a similar story. Republicans are continuing to block attempts to raise the marriage age by arguing for, quote, parental rights and traditional values. Regardless of the obvious harm on children, the Missouri Independent reports the current laws allow children aged 16 and 17 to marry with parental consent and younger children to marry with the judge's approval. Until the legislature voted to raise the minimum age to 16 in 2018, Missouri had among the most lenient child marriage laws in the nation, making it an especially popular state for 15-year-olds to travel to get married. 15-year-olds. Despite the 2018 change, Missouri's law still does not align with international human rights standards, which set the minimum age at 18. It's about 70 minors a year who are married to adults in Missouri. And by the way, this is Republican hypocrisy, right? This is the party that claims to champion the protection of children, but then supports child marriage. They want children to be protected, but then they promote child labor laws. They want children to be healthy, but then they oppose free school lunches. They want children to live. They don't want abortion, but then they'll oppose things like a child tax credit and Medicaid expansion, all of which disproportionately harm, banning them harms low-income children. And I made this point in years past, but surely there must be international human rights law that ban child marriage, right? Well, it's kind of a good news, bad news situation. The good news is, yeah, there are international laws that ban child marriage. For example, the Covenant on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, calls for actions to specify a minimum marriage age of 18. That laws of nations should mandate that marriage is at 18 or older. And so therefore, any U.S. state law which forces minors into marriage is a de facto violation of CEDAW. Now, here's the bad news, that while 186 of 193 countries have ratified the CEDAW treaty, the United States shamefully remains as one of the only 7 countries that has to date refused to ratify the Covenant on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And in doing so, we joined this illustrious list of Iran, Sudan, Somalia, Nauru, Palau, and Tonga as the only nations that decide banning child marriage is not that important for us. So the solutions are pretty clear. One, and by the way, Democrats aren't off the hook either, because only 11 states, all Democratic, but only 11 states have actually banned child marriage. 39 states, plenty of Democratic states, including my home state of Illinois, has not banned child marriage. It is still legal. And that is outstanding. That is outrageously a problem the Democrats need to address as well. So what do we do? Well, Unchained at Last is a great website that you can visit. It's a great organization that's helped pass many of these child marriage bans as well. You can contact them, contribute to them, call your lawmaker on the state level, ask for a state piece of legislation to ban child marriage. We can put federal pressure on your members of Congress and senators and have passed federal legislation that supremacy clause would quash child marriage laws on the state level. We can pressure the White House and Congress to ratify CEDAW and bring the United States up to speed with the vast majority of humanity. Look, experts estimate that in 2024, about 50 children will be forced into a child marriage every single week, 7 per day. This number must come down to 0. So we need to speak up. Look, fundamentally speaking, children are helpless, but we are not. We are not helpless. We need to do whatever is in our capacity as adults. Support organizations like Unchained at Last, contact your state and federal legislator, and let them know that it's critical that we ban child marriage in America. All right. Wanted to make sure I educated folks on that because I'm realizing many folks have no idea that is a reality. When we come back from break, we're going to welcome Corryn G. Freeman, a Florida-based social activist and political operative, a change maker, executive director of Future Coalition, an organization that works on providing young change makers with the resources they need to propel transformational change. And God knows we need transformational change in this country. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm extraordinarily excited to welcome Corryn G. Freeman here to our show. She's a Florida-based social activist, political operative, and a social change agent. She currently serves as the executive director of Future Coalition, an organization whose mission is to provide young change makers with the resources they need to propel transformational change. And, we talk a lot about the need for change and the lack of resources to get there. That's why I'm excited to have Corryn here to talk about that. Corryn, thank you for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I love bringing folks on the show who are doing the work on the ground. A lot of folks will be armchair activists. They'll tweet about something and they'll complain. But I particularly admire leaders who lead organizations who are putting resources in the hands of young people. Talk a bit more about your organization. Who are you? How did you get started? What are some of the projects you're working on right now?
Absolutely. So a bit about like how I got started and into the work of Future Coalition first. So when I grew up with very socially conscious parents. My dad was president of the local NAACP chapter in Maryland, where I grew up. I grew up literally sitting on his lap at NAACP meetings. I grew up, I think it was like the second Million Man March. He was in the planning meetings and I was just sitting there watching the planning happen. And then I was there at the march. I remember meeting Dorothy Height. I remember meeting so many like prominent activists, social justice figures, just because of the work that my dad did. He also ran a church and we were at the church all the time doing community work, soup kitchen work, things like of that nature. And I grew up with a mom who ran a philanthropic nonprofit, a community foundation that got money from larger donors, and gave it really directly into the hands of people who were doing the direct services work. So like that is very much anchored in who it is that I am as a young girl, because my parents were very involved in community and socially active and socially conscious. So when I went to school, I went to Howard University. The year is 2007. There's this big contested election. It's like the first presidential election. There's this lady, Hillary Clinton, who I'm all for. And then this guy named Barack Obama
Mm.
comes and speaks at Crampton. And I'm like, whoa, that guy is it. That guy is it. He set me on a course to change my major to political science. I worked on the campaign, volunteered on the campaign at that time, graduated with my degree, and then I went to go work on the campaign in 2012 to reelect Barack Obama.
Amazing. As I hear you talk about your parents, I love these superhero origin stories because it always reminds me of this James Baldwin quote where he says that children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. So,
Amen.
whatever your parents led by example is you're following in their footsteps, and that's a powerful and inspiring thing. So talk about then Future Coalition in particular, because it sounds like what you're describing is like the brainchild of what Future Coalition is, but what's the niche that Future Coalition is filling right now?
Absolutely. So, Future Coalition, we fundamentally have a belief that youth have the ability to lead, that youth have vision, youth have strategy, youth have a voice that needs to be listened to. And we advocate for their leadership by investing in them financially, by resourcing them with trainings, knowledge, and intergenerational wisdom. So, Future Coalition kind of stands in the gap, one, by amplifying the needs of young people, amplifying the work of young people and resourcing them, and connecting with more established movement leaders, established social justice change agents and leaders, and asking them, in what ways can you incorporate youth? How are you bringing their voices to the table? How are you helping their leadership, and not just directing them, using their energy to fuel your desire, but instead listening to them, allowing them to lead. Sometimes that means fail, learn, grow, and help us get across the mantle toward freedom.
Yeah, I love it. And I think about this often because I don't think people realize when we talk about youth today, this is not a novel concept, right? This is how the United States has moved forward throughout history. We just observed a couple of days ago the anniversary of Robert Smalls at 22, commandeering a Confederate vessel, bringing it to Union waters, and then helping turn the tide of the Civil War. We think about Claudette Colvin at 15 years old, years before Rosa Parks, refusing to give up her seat. We think about Dr. King at 26, leading the Montgomery bus boycott. Fred Hampton at 22.
That's right. That's
disrupting.
right.
And so it's always been about the youth. And I'll tell you, one of the things that gets me really upset right now is, and we were talking about this before we started recording, is what's happening in Gaza and Israel and Palestine. And I think about the fact that I was reading yesterday, more than 3,000 students and some professors have been arrested. More than 3,000 in the United States. And meanwhile, the president just authorized another $1 billion in military aid to Israel, even though they admitted 5 days ago, that, yeah, it's pretty clear that Israel is committing war crimes. With the election coming up, the young people I've been talking to are pretty fed up about this, are pretty upset about this. And some are saying, we're just not going to vote. What's your response to that? How would you address that, in my view, very valid concern?
Ooh, it's such a great question, and I appreciate it. And the first thing I want to say about youth is youth are the moral consciousness of the nation.
Yes.
They are not jaded. They see right, they see wrong based on the learnings that they have been taught. And they are like untainted nerve cells that are telling you something is not right. Something is not right. And we are in a place where the vast majority of our political administration is turning a blind eye instead of addressing the needs of those youth. And I completely understand the position that young people are put in, because at the end of the day, whether you like politics, whether you do politics or not, politics is going to do you.
Yes.
As we are witnessing right now
Got it.
with the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and the president sending $1 billion of additional taxpayer dollars over to Israel, or $1 billion worth of ammunition, bombs, whatever, to Israel. What I say to those young people is to do not be dismayed and continue to participate in the electoral process. I think the uncommitted campaign is a brilliant way to say that we are present, we are voters, this is where we stand. And it's a very gracious act to the president to let him know that if you do not move, we might not move with you. I think that leveraging your power through your vote and uncommitted at the top of the ticket absolutely makes sense during the primary to help Joe Biden see that he has a base that wants to support him, but he needs to move in order to get their support. I also think that those young people should focus on their state, local, congressional elections. At Future Coalition, we're really focusing on school board races in red to blue counties, working on getting progressive school board folks elected to give youth what it is that they need to stop, like you said, I'm in Florida, where we have Don't Say Gay, the banning of certain African-American history being taught, books
Don't say climate
being
change.
banned.
It's wild.
Don't say climate, it's crazy. Florida's insane.
Yeah.
And to stop kind of some of those things and have people who are advocating at the seat of power to continue to educate young people so that they understand that their dissent is patriotic when they feel the need to stand up.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing at Future Coalition, telling the youth, continue to be engaged, think about creative ways to leverage your vote at the top of the ticket, but definitely pay attention to those middle and bottom ticket races.
Yeah, that's music to my ears. I think a lot of folks understand or underestimate the impact of those local school board races and how critical they are. I mean, these are the ones. I was reading an article that all these book bans you're seeing is from 11 knuckleheads around the country. 90% of them are from these 11 knuckleheads. It's mind-boggling to me that they can be so influential, but that's what happens when you get organized for evil. And Dr. King reminds us we need to organize for good with even more ferocity. One of the things I really admire, Corryn, about the work that you're doing is you've provided significant grants to young organizers who are allocating resources or providing support to the Maui fires, certainly to Palestine. I was in Maui after the fires last year to provide legal aid, pro bono legal aid. How do you decide? I mean, the world is on fire, literally speaking. How do you decide which initiatives to fund? And can you talk a little bit about the impact you've seen from these grants as well?
Sure. So we have a grant program called the Youth Direct Action Fund. And the way that works is it has a program manager, but we employ a council of young people who review the grant applications. And they are the ones who decide. We decided to predominantly focus on the continental US, what's happening facing young people in the United States of America.
Sure.
And they review, they choose, and we give grants of up to $5,000 through the Youth Direct Action Fund. But the money that we gave to the Maui wildfires was for young people who were in their community wanting to help provide aid directly. So historically, Future Coalition really had a large climate focus. We've shifted to broaden, take a more intersectional approach, but with that large climate disaster, coupled with the young people who wanted help, we decided to make a larger $75,000 investment in that through the Community Foundation of Hawaii or Maui. I'm not sure which one it is. Community Foundation of Hawaii, I believe it is. When it comes to the Palestinian organizing, students are standing up across the country. The young people are leading this movement. It is on college campuses. I just saw something about on the 24th, and the DMV high school students are organizing a mass walkout. The youth are telling us right now what matters, and we are supportive at Future Coalition, not directive. And so when they ask, we give.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I mean, and it's and if you're just tuning in, by the way, we're speaking to the brilliant Corryn Freeman. She's the executive director of Future Coalition, an organization who provides young people the resources they need to propel transformational change. And I just love the fact that there's such a direct action here. It's not this, sophistication of, here's how you shall do it. It's, hey, you're smart, you'll figure it out. And if you make a mistake, that's okay, because when you're young, it's the time to make those mistakes. And you're going to grow and develop and be even more effective when you're 30, 40, 50 years old. And I love that, because when we talk about justice, to me, the root of all justice has to be economic justice. You want to talk about, you want to talk about gender equality, pay women equal.
Say
you
that.
You want to talk about racial justice, let's talk about reparations. You want to talk about indigenous
Say
justice,
that.
reparations there
Land
as well.
back.
Thank you. And so to be an organization saying, hey, young people, we want to help you achieve justice. Here's money, go forth and conquer, is powerful. And the work you've done really transcends in this space as well. I was reading up, and I loved, because for me, universal healthcare is a human right. It's a fundamental core of what we should be offering. And your work with the Florida for All organization included managing the Medicaid expansion ballot initiative and coordinating voter registration efforts. This is the Lord's work you're doing right here. Talk about that, because there's a lot of states still trying to figure that out. What did you do, and how can you talk about your success and progress there?
Absolutely. So I want to give a big shout out to Florida for All and the statewide alignment group. Y'all know who you are if you are listening. They taught me so much about what it means to organize in a collaborative. So not just a coalition, but a deep alignment structure where organizations that have different focuses align themselves on a vision, much like the right does, to achieve gains over a period of time. The alignment structure still works, still exists, and we are working toward achieving that change over a longer period of time. And the work that I did at Florida for All, for me, was extremely meaningful. So one thing I did was the ballot initiative for Medicaid expansion, worked with great organizers from a multitude of organizations to organize petition collecting, paid and volunteer, across the state of Florida to get Medicaid expansion on the ballot. Unfortunately, we weren't successful that time, but it makes space for another Medicaid expansion ballot initiative to happen in the future. I also worked on Amendment 4 in Florida, which was, I was the field director there, where the Second Chances campaign, where we were successful in giving 2.4 million returning citizens, former felons, giving them access to their voting rights eligibility once again in the state of Florida. And that was an extremely landmark opportunity. But that coalition was led by Desmond Meade, who was able to pull together organizers from all across the state, resources from out of the state of Florida, to get more than 60% of Floridians to pass that ballot initiative. And then also building out the election protection program, which is really the highlight of one of my organizing experiences. I had the opportunity to brainstorm what an election protection program would look like across the state of Florida, work with dozens of organizations and individual volunteers to create a mechanism and a machine that honestly ended up working without me, that really protected voters. There was a whole system where we had the volunteers out at the polls. They would communicate via WhatsApp. Whenever things had to be escalated, we escalated it to the legal chat. Things got really bad, they went to the executive directors and the boiler room to either choose to dispatch, whether it was police or have legal aids then come, things of that nature to protect the vote. But it really taught me about the importance of being in a collective and working together, not having any ego. My role might be to build the thing, but I'm here to work with you to make the thing a reality. And the thing, though it might have been born of my mind, does not belong to me. It belongs to all of us because it's for the good of the community.
Beautifully said. It's that old saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think this is indicative of that. And back to this point you made about voter registration and voter access, particularly for returning citizens. I like to remind folks that the entire concept of felon disenfranchisement is rooted not only in white supremacy, but overtly on the recognition that these enslaved people might be free and we need to find
Say
new
that.
mechanisms to ensure that they don't have access to power or influence. And I think I was in law school when I read The New Jim Crow, and how Dr. Michelle Alexander talks about there's a myth that if we only educated people enough, we could end racism. And maybe on the individual level, that's true, but systemically racist policies are extraordinarily sophisticated. They don't exist to a lack of ignorance. They exist to an excess of maliciousness and just pure evil planning and something like felon disenfranchisement.
Intentionally crafted. They are intentionally
Exactly.
crafted and built, and they must be systemically dismantled.
Exactly.
And it's giving people the political education to be able to see the invisible structures that we
Yes.
flow through. These systems flow through us. And it is oftentimes just not in our conscious because we have been so we brainwashed essentially to believe certain things are right and just when the reality is no, that's patriarchy, that's
Yep.
capitalism,
Yep.
that's racism.
That's right. That's right. It's I remember the North Carolina appeals court when they overturned the voter ID law in North Carolina. They wrote
Mm-hmm.
that the Republicans wrote this law with surgical precision to target those IDs that Black voters are more likely to use. And so I mean, so you look at it like, well, it's a voter ID. Everybody has voter IDs, right? So what's wrong with that? But then when you look at the precision, to your point, you know, on the surface, it's like, well, what's wrong with that? It's normal. But when you look down under the hood a little bit, you're like, oh, they actually did research to find out, do Black people particularly prefer a particular type of ID? And if they do, they
Mm-hmm.
banned that particular ID, forcing Black people to have to go through an extra step. And the thing is, you don't need to ban 100% of Black people. You just need to ban
Certain
enough,
percent
1%, 2%, enough to get over
to
that.
keep your seat of power.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
And that's what we're dealing with. So the work you're doing in the space is critical. And again, if you're tuning in, we are speaking to someone who I just met, but I'm in love with because she's amazing. Corryn Freeman, Florida-based activist and executive director of the Future Coalition. Let's talk music because I know this is a big thing for you. You've co-founded the Black Violin Foundation,
Yes.
empowering youth through music. I've got 3 kids. They do a million different things, and one of them begged me to get him a keyboard, and so I did. And like, kids are amazing. He found an app on the Apple Store, and he's teaching himself how to play piano on an app. And I'm just like, what? That's incredible. But I love seeing him grow. What role do you see music play in the social justice movement?
Ooh, thank you for the question. I love music. Music is an expression of like music expresses what words often cannot. You know, there's so
Yes.
much beauty in music that I feel so deeply. And music is the way that movements emote,
Mm,
right? Movements portray the emotional feelings that movements are going through. Art does that.
mm,
And I think music is here to reflect the time that we are in, to reflect back to the establishment power structure, to reflect back to people who won't hear, and to validate for the people who are feeling where we are in the world, in society, what's happening, to validate that pain, to validate that
mm.
hurt, to validate that excitement, to validate that joy, and to show those who won't listen that this exists. Because music has the capacity to touch people in places where our words, our cries, our protests can't.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. One of my mentors growing up is the late jazz musician, jazz great Yusuf Lateef. And
Okay.
um, I, I was young when I first met him. It was at the mosque, and I think I was maybe 13 years old. I had no idea who he was, and just kind of like this loving grandfather figure. And then as I got older, I was like, oh, okay. And then Ahmed Jamal is another one. I think where where I really appreciate the role of music in the social justice movement is especially in Jim Crow America, the jazz movement
Mm.
in particular, because and this is coming straight from Yusuf Uncles, what we call them, is that this was their form of protest, that when they would be beaten in the streets for speaking out, this was their way of telling their story in a way that their community understood. And for him, his community was twofold. It was African Americans and Muslim Americans. And at that point in time, it was basically a complete overlap of the two circles in and of itself. Let's talk about the future, because we're coming up on this election very, very quickly, less than 6 months away. Every single poll in swing states, vast majority of them, shows Biden losing to Trump by anywhere from 1 to 6, 7 points. These are swing states that he needs to win. I don't see how mathematically you can win an election without these. But he's not changing course on things that young people care about. He's taken steps forward on climate justice, but he's not being as aggressive as what the scientists tell us that we need to do. He's taking steps forward on student loan forgiveness, but it's a far cry from what was initially promised of total loan forgiveness. On Gaza, he continues to acknowledge that while Israel's committing war crimes, continue to send them arms. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, why wouldn't you change course? Do you think why do you think that is? This is a big question, and I don't even know if it's fair to ask, but when you're running a campaign, you see ideas that are unpopular and you say, let me change my ideas. Why aren't we seeing that happen? What's going on? What are we missing?
I can tell you what I think it is, but again, I don't have the answer. But just from my point of view, I think there are certain issues that when Biden got elected, I don't think he anticipated October 7th, 2023 happening. I didn't think that he anticipated having to make good on commitments to AIPAC, having to make good on allegiances around this Israeli-Palestinian conflict that we are seeing right now, at all at the scope at which things are happening. I don't think that he anticipated that things would kind of pop off the way that they have popped off. And I can only imagine the amount of pressure after having stated all of these things, made all of these alignments, and then the cards fall as they do. I think that he is having trouble finding balance between what is right, what is just, and his commitments and alignments. He is out of what appears to me to be alignment with his words and actions. He can't make his actions meet his words. And I think sometimes that also has something to do with the structures that exist around the presidency that sometimes people don't quite understand, even though he was the vice president of the nation.
Yeah. Well said. I mean, but I think that's where people would say you ran on being the most seasoned veteran out there who can solve all these problems. So how did this stuff catch you off guard?
That's the right question to ask. And I hope everyone asks themselves that question.
But I want you to double down on a point as we're down to the last 3 or 4 minutes about the importance of down ballot voting. Why does that matter in the grand scheme of things? If the president ends up being somebody that you just vehemently oppose and disagree with, what role does down ballot voting really play in this place?
Absolutely. Because like I said earlier, if you don't do politics, politics will do you regardless. And the politicians that are further down on the ballot are the politicians that most directly impact your day-to-day life in the city, in the county, and in the state that you are operating in. So having a good read on who your city council people are, like what are the plans for community development? Do you like having open space parks? Are you okay with having developers come in and take that public park space and now make it this big mini mall, gentrified community that now impacts your ability to pay your rent? Now your rent is $500 higher because of the decisions that your city council, your county council, your county executive approved. Those things hit you very, very, very directly. And they impact your economic stability, what you're able to learn in schools, the school boards, what the things that you are allowed to do as a citizen or resident in the community that you are operating in.
So what you're saying is every young person should be running for office.
Absolutely. Everyone. I just had a conversation with Congressman Maxwell Frost yesterday,
Yeah.
and he said something to me that really was beautiful. And fun fact, I was approached to actually be Maxwell's campaign manager, but I chose to sit on his kitchen cabinet and I watched him kind of become where he is now, which is beautiful. He said to me, it is important though, he was a very prominent gun reform activist before he decided to run for office. But he talks about his success in getting the president to take on the Office of Gun Violence Prevention as an executive order, influenced by Maxwell Frost. He credits his connection to the organizing and activism of gun violence, of gun reform, and bringing that with him into office that allowed for President Biden to see that. So what's important for young people to know is to be connected in movement. And when you run with movement on your side, because Maxwell said it. He said he brought movement with him into his elected position. And when he did that, we were able to see a piece of reform. So guys, get active in community movements, whether it's Future Coalition, Dream Defenders, whatever organization that you feel aligned with, and don't be scared, make the run.
You took the last question before I could even ask it. What should young people be doing? Corryn Freeman, Executive Director of Future Coalition. Last comment, Corryn, how can folks support the work you're doing? How can they find you and support your organization and elevate the incredible work that you're already doing?
Absolutely. So follow us on socials. Instagram, we're at Future Coalition. Follow us there. Go to futurecoalition.org. Feel free to look through all of the programs. They have different opening deadlines. If you feel like you have a project that you want incubated with Future Incubator, apply there. If you want YDAF, Youth Direct Action Funds, up to $5,000 to organize your own direct action, apply. If you are a civic volunteer or want to be civically engaged, look up our civic program. And if you just generally want to help, join our email list. We offer a lot of petition signing, phone banking, and text banking through our email program that you can be a part of.
You guys, I hope you're paying attention, because leaders like Corryn are rare, and she's not only talking the talk, she's walked the walk, and she's offering you resources if you apply yourself. Corryn, thank you so much for being with us. Hope to have you back soon.
Most definitely. Thank you.
Corryn Freeman, Florida-based social activist and political operative, executive director of Future Coalition, an organization who is focused on helping young people be the change makers they were born to be. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Harrison Mann, a U.S. major Army officer who just resigned over his protest of what's happening in Gaza. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was Corryn Freeman, Executive Director of Future Coalition, an amazing organization that is working and leading from the front on youth engagement by providing direct grants and resources to young people doing the critical work to save our democracy. Check them out, support them, follow them, elevate them. As we close out the last couple of minutes, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about this really powerful letter written by Harrison Mann, a U.S. Army major who just put in his resignation in protest of the war in Gaza. And I'll read excerpts of his letter because I think it speaks to the fact that what we're seeing is not normal. What we're witnessing is not something that we should just brush under the rug as just another war, as if that's a phrase that should ever escape our lips without being challenged. And it speaks to the fact that we can play a meaningful role to make our voices heard. This guy just gave up his entire career for what he believes in, and I commend him for that. He starts off by saying, "Dear team, I want to thank you all for welcoming me with a warmth and collegiality that made me feel like I'd always been part of this team. I was proud to earn the trust of this exceptional group of officers. I regard my superiors in intellect and expertise, whose leadership and integrity have always impressed me." He goes on to thank them, and then he asked, he talks about the admiration he has for these policymakers, and then he goes on to say, but this office does not only inform policy, it facilitates and at times directly executes policy. And the policy that has never been far from my mind for the past 6 months is the nearly unqualified support for the government of Israel, which has enabled and empowered the killing and starvation of tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians. He goes on to say, as we were recently reminded, this unconditional support also encourages reckless escalation that risks wider war. Now, this is while the Biden administration is admitting that the weapons that our tax dollars fund and have been sent to Israel have been used to commit war crimes. This is what's been weighing on his mind. And so he goes on to say that my work here has unquestionably contributed to that support. The past months have presented us with the most horrific and heartbreaking images imaginable, sometimes playing on the news in our own spaces. And I have been unable to ignore the connection between those images and my duties here. This caused me incredible shame and guilt. Most of you know I already intended to leave the army at some point, but this moral injury is what led me to finally submit my resignation. I understand that these words come as a surprise to many of you, but I've had my reasons. And he talks about he had hoped the war would end sooner. He would hope that policy would change, but none of that happened. And he talks about the fear he overcame of violating professional norms, fear of disappointing officers he respected, fear that people would feel betrayed. But he says that none of this is indefensible. Each of us signed on, and at some point it became difficult for me to defend the outcomes of this policy. And he says, at some point, whatever the justification, you're either advancing a policy that enables the mass starvation of children, or you're not. I'm going to say that again. He said, at some point, whatever the justification, you're either advancing a policy that enables the mass starvation of children, or you're not. And he's right. There's not a middle ground on this particular matter. No aid truck has entered Rafah since May 5th. And the trucks that are attempting to enter, Israeli settlers are attacking and destroying the aid without any consequence whatsoever. And he says that on this policy of enabling mass starvation of children, he says, I know that I did in my small way wittingly advance that policy. And I want to clarify that as a descendant of European Jews, I was raised in a particularly unforgiving moral environment that when it came to the topic of bearing responsibility for ethnic cleansing, my grandfather refused to ever purchase products manufactured in Germany, where the paramount importance of never again and the inadequacy of just following orders were oft repeated. I am haunted by the knowledge that I have failed those principles, but I also have hope that my grandfather would afford me some grace, that he would still be proud of me for stepping away from this war, however belatedly. He talks about how he would also regret waiting longer, and again, the fear that he has in voicing his concerns, and the fear that others have as well. And he closes by saying, I just want you to know that you are not alone. And again, I think that important message of solidarity is critically important because people need to understand that when they feel like they're alone in opposing a moral injustice, they're not. And sometimes there's a million other people standing there with you silently, just waiting for you to be the one to speak up and say, hey, this is morally wrong. We should not be bombing children. And so if that is you, feel free to speak your truth powerfully, peacefully, courageously, just as U.S. Army Major Harrison Mann has done, and lead by example, because that can ignite a movement of people committed to compassion and justice. My heart goes out to the people in Rafah. I've been raising money. I've been supporting physicians on the ground, and I've been asking folks to uphold justice because that's the only path forward. I'm reminded again of the quote of James Baldwin, who I love quoting, but he says that the children are ours all over the world, all the children. And I'm beginning to suspect that whosoever has lost sight of this is incapable of morality. We need to recognize these children as Palestine as our own, whether you're Muslim or not, whether you're Arab or not, because that humanity cannot be compromised. That's the only path forward. Whew. All right, my guys. Yeah, thank you for tuning in, guys. I appreciate you. Be sure to follow us on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. If you're listening on Substack, please do upgrade from free to paid, because that's what makes this work possible. Whether it's $5 a month or $50 a year, it matters. You have my promise to continue to advance the show that builds on compassion and justice and accountability for those in power. Got a great show lined up for next week as well. Be sure to tune in, same time, same place at 10 a.m. on Sunday on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. My friends, be fierce, lead with compassion and justice, and continue speaking truth to power. Until next week, peace.